So my name is John Hartorna. I'm the founder and CEO of MassChallenge. I think you guys should be familiar with the program, but we're working with Skolkovo to help run a series of events to help support you all as startups and connect you with some of the mentors in the MassChallenge program, as well as some training and a demo day ultimately later in the year. So I'm gonna just start with a quick overview of MassChallenge, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about global expansion in the next section. So I just wanted to give that very quick intro. We're super excited to be working with Skolkovo. My жена русская, and I have a son and daughter that speak Russian, and I have strong ties to Russia. I lived in St. Petersburg for 6 months and in Pskov, where my wife is from, for 3 months. So I have a kind of a deep appreciation for Russia, and I think there's a really awesome opportunity in Russia because there's so much talent and resources, and I think so much of the infrastructure has improved, and there's, I think, still a good way to go, but we can hopefully will contribute some value to each of you as startups and help connect you with other outside resources that can be really helpful. All right, I'm going to watch along on my screen here so I don't have to turn my back to it, but let me dive. Oh.
Before we start the presentation, let us introduce the whole thing, introduce the partners, because this is the official part, right?
Do you want to?
Sure, of course. Спасибо большое, Джон. Thank you very much. И сейчас мы хотели бы представить всех наших партнеров, из тех, кто присутствует сегодня, и тех, кто смог присоединиться к нам. Это компания Intel. И, конечно, сейчас, я думаю, Игорь Богачев в первую очередь должен будет сказать несколько слов о нашей программе, о том, что вас ждет, и пожелать вам, так сказать, доброго пути. Наш партнер, еще раз повторю, компания Intel расскажет о замечательном призе, который вас ждет. Победителей, да? Один из победителей получит приз от компании Intel. Так что сейчас прошу Алексея Николаева, Игоря Богачева сказать несколько слов перед тем, как мы начнем уже официально программу, и Джон начнет свою презентацию. It's just little introduction. Прошу, Игорь. А ты не будешь говорить пару слов? Хорошо.
Да, Катя, спасибо огромное. Меня зовут Алексей Николаев, я представляю корпорацию Intel. Также здесь есть Игорь Калошин. Хочу, чтобы вы поприветствовали тоже Игоря как представителя Intel. Потому что Игорь у нас очень много работает со Сколково и продвигает тоже программы, связанные со стартапами. И частью этой программы, частью нашей активности, так сказать, основными реперными точками, которые являются и наша поддержка WebReady, и наше участие в Сколково Startup Village, является еще и международный конкурс, который мы ведем вместе с университетом Калифорнии Беркли. Конкурс называется Intel Global Challenge. И, как Екатерина отметила, одним из призов, который будет здесь распределяться на основании акселератора, на основании того, насколько вы, как стартапы, как команды, действительно сможете ускориться в результате вот этой вот 4-дневной программы, будет путевка, приглашение на финал вот этого Intel Global Challenge, конкурса, который будет проходить с 3 по 7 ноября в Беркли, в Калифорнии. Мероприятие крайне интересное, его призовой фонд составляет $100 000, но это, на мой взгляд, не самое главное. А главное то, что это не просто конкурс, а это еще и очень интенсивная программа, как образовательная, так и по выстраиванию контактов со всей экосистемой Кремниевой долины. Сейчас программа этого мероприятия этого года верстается, но по опыту прошлого года что было интересного? То есть, опять же, кроме, собственно, конкурса, это были и визиты в такие значимые места, как Стэнфорд, университет Стэнфорда, в акселератор Plug and Play, лекции и встречи с такими звучными фигурами, именами, как Гай Кавасаки и Стив Бланк. И вот такого рода путевку мы будем тоже распределять на базе именно вашего успеха, на базе того, как вы сможете развить свой проект в результате этого акселератора. Спасибо огромное.
Спасибо большое, Алексей. Игорь Богачев, вице-президент, исполнительный директор кластера информационных технологий.
Спасибо, друзья. Доброе утро. Честно говоря, во-первых, я хочу поблагодарить коллег из Сколково, которые все это мероприятие организовали. Это Катя Гайка и Максим Михайлов. Спасибо вам, ребят, большое. И, конечно, коллег из MassChallenge, которые нашли возможность и время, чтобы приехать к нам и, в принципе, потратить свое драгоценное время на вас, в первую очередь, да, на те компании, которые были тщательно отобраны для данной программы из большого количества заявок, которые мы получили в рамках IT-кластера. И, во-вторых, я, конечно, хочу позавидовать, потому что эта программа действительно уникальная возможность получить доступ к большому пулу менторов здесь, сегодня и сейчас. И не каждая компания имеет такую возможность. Я хотел бы пожелать вам, чтобы вы использовали эту неделю максимально качественно для себя. И обратить ваше внимание, что работа с менторами, она существенно отличается от работы, например, с тренерами или с консультантами. Да? Главная ваша задача в работе с менторами состоит в том, что вы должны сформулировать те вопросы, которые вас интересуют, а они должны на них ответить, а не наоборот. Вот, поэтому все время думайте над тем, что вас волнует, что мешает вашей компании развиваться. И самый плохой вопрос, да, который может быть в рамках этой недели, это незаданный вопрос. Поэтому, пожалуйста, не стесняйтесь. Ну и в конечном итоге, конечно, хочется пожелать вам большого успеха, супер-мега результатов с точки зрения роста бизнеса, выхода на новые рынки, потому что в конечном итоге мы подобные программы затеиваем именно за этим. За только одна причина может быть приезда сюда всех этих людей, участие, соответственно, в этой недельной программе и дальнейшее участие в Америке. Это ваш успех, друзья, поэтому не тратьте время и давайте уже начинать работать. Спасибо.
Да. Игорь, спасибо большое. Я вам в двух словах хочу нарисовать картину, как все будет развиваться в дальнейшем. Помимо 4 дней, которые сегодня начинаются и в 4 заканчиваются, это так называемый bootcamp, когда вы будете активно работать, слушать лекции, работать в воркшопах друг с другом и с нашими менторами. Через 3 недели в течение конференции «Открытые инновации» у нас пройдет демо-дэй, да, в течение которого вы сможете выступить перед жюри чуть более широким, чем те менторы, которые будут сегодня. Это будут представители университета Дрейпера, те, кто предоставляет 3 места для вас, для победителей, для участия в программе акселерации университета Дрейпера. Там будут представители MassChallenge, которые вам дадут возможность получить ускоренный доступ, опять же, для участия в акселераторе MassChallenge. Там будет замечательная компания Intel, которая предоставит вам приз, ну и так далее. Поэтому хотела вам нарисовать, чтобы вы планировали свое время в ближайшие 2 месяца таким образом, что сегодня и в ближайшие 4 дня мы встречаемся с вами каждый день в API Moscow. На открытых инновациях у нас с вами 1 день питч-тренинга и 1 день, посвященный демо-дню, где вы делаете свои презентации. И в ноябре с 27 октября по 7 ноября мы едем в роуд-шоу, так называемое, по Бостону и Калифорнии. Первая часть – это Бостон. Мы с вами участвуем, у нас с вами демо-дэй в Global MassChallenge в акселераторе и также встреча с представителем экосистемы бостонской. И потом мы едем в Калифорнию, где у нас с вами отдельная программа тренингов с 1 по 3, а с 3 по 7 те, кто получит приз от Intel, будут участвовать в акселерационной программе Intel. Для всех остальных мы делаем программу встреч с инвесторами, партнерами и замечательными людьми, которые живут в Силиконовой долине. На этом все. Я передаю передаю микрофон Джону, который начнет уже непосредственно образовательную программу. Спасибо большое всем, кто пришел так рано. И Джон.
Okay, so I'm not going to speak in Russian because we'll be here. It'll be a very awkward presentation if I do. So I'm going to segue into the global expansion first section. But first, I want to give you a quick overview of MassChallenge. I think you guys are somewhat familiar with what we do, but I'd like to fill in some of the gaps and make sure you understand what we do, because as I discuss global expansion, I'm going to walk you through our actual global strategy. And in order to understand that, it will be helpful if you understand what we do. So MassChallenge is the largest ever startup accelerator. and the first to support entrepreneurs with no strings attached, meaning we don't take any equity from entrepreneurs, we don't take any revenue from entrepreneurs, we don't place any restrictions on them whatsoever. They don't have to headquarter in a certain place or be from a certain place or be in a certain industry. It's a completely open program. We use a competition framework. We give away over $1 million of cash prizes every year as grants. Nothing taken in return, no equity or anything. And anybody can enter from anywhere in the world with any startup in any industry. We focus on early stage startups, so not a division of Google, but an early stage new idea with less than $500,000 worth of investment and less than $1 million of annual revenue is our focus. This year we had 1,657 applications from 50 countries and 40 states. We use experts from the ecosystem, many of whom are in the room, as judges to filter through those applications, identify 350 that then do in-person pitches, and then the top 128 startups enter into the accelerator. They get 4 months of intensive mentorship, training, free office space, free airline miles, free 3D printer access, all sorts of free stuff. And at the end of the 4 months, there's a final round of judging, and we declare 26 teams the winners. They split $1 million in cash, plus our partners also put money on top of that. So this year, it's $1.75 million of cash that will be given out. So we've completed the program 4 times. This is our 5th year, and the teams from the first 4 years have raised over $600 million worth of outside investment. They have over $350 million of revenue. They've created over 4,000 jobs, and they are worth, in aggregate, well over $2 billion in value. And their satisfaction rating for MassChallenge is higher than Apple customers' satisfaction for Apple Computer. So they're very happy. We do have a pretty friendly model in that we give away a lot of money and we don't take anything in return. It's a good business model for customer satisfaction. So that's basically what we do. It's a strange model, right? We're really big. 128 startups is a large accelerator. Most are 30, 40. Y Combinator is 85. That's the second biggest that I know of. So we're almost 50% bigger than them. So it's large. We work with all different industries, including nonprofits. Right, so we work with any startup, any new idea for a new organization that's disruptive can enter. Life science, clean tech, webby, software, mobile startups, retail goods, anything. Okay? We're looking for big disruptive ideas that have the potential for significant impact on humanity. Okay, so that's the criteria. And we do that, and then the third unique thing is that we don't take equity. So why are we structured like that? Is because we launched MassChallenge at the depth of the recession, the very bottom. Literally, we launched, the Dow was below 7,000. Right, it had fallen from 13,500 to 7,000 over several months. And we launched in that very depth in order to save the world, essentially. So our mission is to catalyze a renaissance globally. We want to restore the creative impulse to the business mentality. So we want to restore creativity to the soul of the economy globally, because what happened that led us to that downfall was just too much greed in the system, too many people extracting profit and not enough people creating something valuable. Okay, so startups are the ultimate value creators. I mean, Amazon hasn't even extracted profit yet, right? So it takes a long time, even for big successful startups, to extract profit. And along the way, they create enormous amounts of value. So if we can shift the balance of the economy more towards the creative class, these entrepreneurs, then we will live in a significantly better world. And that's what our mission is. So we're more philosophically designed around what we do than we are for profit. We're not investors. It's a non-profit organization. We don't extract profit anywhere. We do this for the good of humanity. And so startups are our people that we want to benefit and support. Okay? So that's what we do. Let me stop there just to see if there's any quick questions on the model, and then I'll walk you through our expansion. Any questions?
That you do not take any equity or something from startups, but you distribute more than $1 million. So where this million comes from?
So the question for the cameras was, we don't take any equity, but we distribute money and we have operating costs. Where does our money come from? So we are funded through sponsorships and grants. We have some of our biggest sponsors are Fidelity, Verizon, Microsoft, IBM, Unilever, the Royal Bank of Scotland. So we have large corporates represent the majority of our funding. We also have some foundations like the Blackstone Charitable Foundation, the Richard and Susan Smith Family Foundation, and we have some billionaire philanthropists that give us money directly. And then we also use our expansion to generate revenue. So we are interested in bringing MassChallenge to every populated continent on the planet. And we want to launch 10 new offices over the next 5 years. So in the process of building the relationships necessary to do that, we also charge money for engagement with these ecosystems and to help make connections, et cetera. So almost consulting style. So for instance, we are, with Skolkovo, we have a paid relationship, we have a partnership. We also have with 10 other organizations around the world, and that represents significant revenue for us as well. And I'll talk about that a little bit in here. There was another question. Same question, okay. Cool, so that's what we do. I'll dive in. You guys can feel free to raise your hand at any time or shout out, and I'll answer questions at any time. So keep in mind that our mission is to change the global economy, right? We left high-paying jobs at a high-flying consulting company at the depth of the recession to launch this because we believe that the economic model is corrupted, has been perverted towards an excessive focus on short-term profit extraction, and that is incredibly damaging for humanity. And if we can shift focus towards longer-term value creation, we actually will all make more money. Like, I'm not opposed to profit. We will all be richer, including the very wealthy. This is not an antagonistic model. This is a model of, instead of fighting over slices of the pie, let's make more pie, right? And then we all win, and we also get to solve problems and create jobs and growth in the process. So given that that's our model and our goal is Renaissance, let me get into that in a second. And our goal is global Renaissance. We need to be all around the world. So we can't only operate from Boston. Anybody can enter, but it's far away from Russia. It's far away from Australia. If you have a great idea in another place, it's very difficult for a early stage startup to pay to fly to Boston, spend 4 months there, integrate with people, and it might be taking them away from their customers and their funders and team, et cetera. So we want to export it around the world. So that's part of our mission, and then we set out on global expansion. We've just launched that initiative. We are launching a London office right now. We'll announce it in about a couple of months, and then we'll run a London program next year. We already have a small program in Israel, but the only physical office we have right now today is Boston. In Israel, we have a small program to identify startups and bring them to Boston. And in London, we're about to launch the office, okay? So that's the context. This was the plan that we built in order to expand. It includes our rationale, how we selected countries, and a lot of so I'm going to walk you through the logic of a good global expansion strategy, and I'm going to use our actual strategy as the example, okay? Before I get into our strategy, just some very quick, you guys don't see that one. Some very quick thoughts on, these are some of the common reasons to go global and some of the obvious challenges to consider as you do that. This is not exhaustive, it's just a quick sort of list of some thoughts. So for us, it supports our company mission. Like, we can't accomplish our mission unless we have a global presence, because I want to change the global economy, so I can't do that only from one city. I need to enter all around the world. It also is an opportunity for us to increase our revenue, and that is probably, for most of you, the reason that most of you are seeking further international expansion is access to more revenue, a bigger market, or growth opportunities. There's also some benefits depending on your business where you can generate greater scale or access network benefits by having just access to a bigger market or multiple networks. So for instance, for us, our mission is to help entrepreneurs succeed. So Boston has a very good ecosystem, but it's not a global media hub, right? The Boston newspapers and television stations are very well produced, but you don't read those newspapers here, right? The Hotel Balchuk does not have the Boston Globe in the lobby, but it does have the New York Times, the Financial Times. So New York and London are global media hubs. When we open up our office in London, we now can access global media, and we can use that global media as a resource to help our startups in Boston. So for us, there's a network benefit in extending ourselves into new markets. As we enter new markets, also, London is a global financial center. So there's a lot more money in London than there is in Boston. Boston is a wealthy place and there's plenty of money, but you have access to totally new types of funding that may be interested in some of our startups that aren't as appealing to the immediate vicinity in Boston. So now we have more resources available to help our startups. And as we expand to 10, 15 locations around the world, we can optimize resource allocation globally to benefit startups. So a startup from Dubai might benefit from a connection to somebody in London to get media exposure, and from a designer in Boston or a mentor in Boston who has experience building that type of startup. And then you just get these network benefits across. You also can be seeking complementary resources. So similarly here, you might be seeking funding, you might be seeking mentorship or media or some other advantage through another country or market that you don't find in Russia. And so that's another opportunity there. And another thing that's not that obvious, but it's a good idea when you're, basically you would like to design your company and your products in touch with your ultimate market. So if you know you're ultimately going to be a global company, then you should already be getting feedback from the global market and tying it into your product at the design stage to make it easier for you to scale that up and maintain, so you don't have to rebuild it all from the ground up. Some fairly obvious challenges. You're going to need money, and you're going to need team members to get this done. Right? So for us, we're still pretty small. We're a startup, 5th year. We're a nonprofit, so we don't have gobs of money, and it's tough that we have to spend money to expand. We have to hire new people, and typically you have to hire those people before you generate the revenue to pay for them. There's language and cultural differences. There's all sorts of legal restrictions and regulations. For instance, we're a nonprofit. That means something different in the US than it does in the UK or Israel or Russia or Germany. So we have to often incorporate again in each new market in order to reflect the local laws and regulations around what is a charity and what is a nonprofit. Those things can be very difficult. Time zone differences, I'll tell you, working with Israel is really brutal for me because their day only has a few hours of overlap with our day in Boston. So I have to get up really early. So I'll get up at 4 in the morning to have phone calls with all my partners in Israel. And then I still have all my partners in Boston. So my day just gets 3 extra hours added onto it. And then also they have a different weekend. So you have, they don't work on Fridays, but they do work on Sundays. So now I get inundated with emails and phone calls on Sundays, and I can't get anything done on Fridays. So it is surprisingly complex for a small company when you don't have a 24-hour support service. Typically 3 or 4 of you, one of you is just going to have to suck it up and deal with a much longer, more complicated day. It's a bigger deal than you think. It's solvable, but it is challenging. And then this next point is pretty important. So I'm the CEO, and I manage our main strategy, and I'm the main point of contact for some of our biggest sponsors, and I also manage a lot of the team activities. So I'm going to spend about a month in Europe for September. Almost the entire month is London, Russia, Berlin, Zurich, Paris. So I'm not in Boston, right? And as a small team, we don't have that much depth on the management team, so that's a risk that I'm no longer paying attention at home, and that can hurt some of our partners there. It can lead to some crises. So we've addressed these challenges, as you'll see, but it is a risk. And then another thing on the local competitive advantage. So for instance, in Boston, one of our strengths is we have an incredibly good network, right? There are 5 billionaires on my board. So there's nobody in Massachusetts I couldn't get a meeting with tomorrow if I wanted, because we've penetrated the elite echelon of the network, and we know all of the successful entrepreneurs, we know all the universities, we know the politicians, we know all the corporate executives. So I can funnel you into anybody in Boston very quickly. That's a huge advantage, even relative other accelerators in Boston. Those contacts don't necessarily matter in London. Right, so a competitive advantage we built in Boston doesn't easily carry into the new market. Now, it does to some extent, because our billionaires in Boston know billionaires in London, and so we can start to jump over, but it takes time to build that advantage up again. Another sort of small example, but in Israel, they don't really use Twitter. It didn't become popular, so they use Facebook and other social media. So we have 20,000 plus followers on Twitter, and they don't mean anything in Israel. So now we have to add a new social media layer. The distribution channels and other things are very different. So your whole company that was built around a certain set of strengths, they don't necessarily translate when you go abroad. So just keep some of those things in mind. All right, so with those quick background thoughts in mind, when we built our global strategy, we addressed these 8 questions, okay? I moved some of the slides around and I simplified some, but this is actually our real strategy that I'm going to walk you through. It's a little old and the numbers are not exactly right, but it will give you a good sense for how we thought through it. So the first thing to address is, what is the goal? Like, what are you accomplishing? Why do you want to go into an international market? It may, oh, sorry. These are the 8 questions. I forgot you guys are on a different computer. So these are the 8 questions that we look at. And I'm going to start with, what is the goal? So we'll walk through every single one in order. But first and foremost, I think it's really important to define, what are you trying to accomplish in your international expansion? And as much as possible, make it a really crisp, clear goal with specific metrics. Like, if you're trying to increase revenue, how much revenue? By when? Using which products? Like, you want to nail it down and be very specific so you can measure your success, and you can along the way and once and at the end. So this is our goal slide. So our goal is to launch 10 new offices over the next 5 years. This is our overarching mission, is to catalyze a global startup renaissance. And these are some of the specific goals. We want to have, right now we have 128 finalists. Those are in the accelerator program in Boston. So we want to have more than 1,000 per year in 5 years. We want to get more than 10,000 applications globally at the end of that period. We'll have 12 office locations, because we already have 2, so 10 new ones on 5 continents. So we will probably not go to Antarctica right away, but on all the populated continents. And we'll be giving out more than $16 million in free cash around the globe annually, right? We will continue to be a leader in NPS, is the satisfaction survey. We are in the top 5 ranked companies on the planet in terms of the satisfaction of our users. And we will continue, despite all this growth and growing really fast, we will continue to maintain incredible customer service and satisfaction. So we won't jeopardize the happiness of our customers by overgrowing. And we will begin to launch additional services for the benefit of the startups. For instance, we could add an investment fund. We could do more with our software to do more online training, education. That's still to be determined, but we'll have investigated those, and we'll be launching some new services for the support of the startups. Okay, let me pause there. It's early and you guys look tired. Maybe somebody has a question. You guys want to do some jumping jacks? Everybody just stand up for me and sit down again. Just do this. Just stand up for me. Shake. We'll do like a little bit of a stretch, all right? Because it's too early. I could use a stretch too. I don't think we have time in an hour. That's the workshop. You can do it in a workshop. All right. Everybody good? Get a good stretch out? All right. So no questions on this. This is how we defined it. This is how we, oops, sorry. This is how we spell it. This is how we calculate it. We have a lot more calculations that I won't show you all of. But this is our very first year of existence. We had 446 applications, then 733, then just over 1,200, and then just under 1,200 in 2013, which is interesting, right? But notice this little teeny sliver there, that little teeny red sliver is Israel. So that was the year we launched a new program. And I, as the CEO, spent a lot of time in Israel. And guess what? Didn't get as many applications, right? Because I wasn't running marketing as closely. I wasn't working as closely with the team. So you see a drop. And that is that risk that we talked about. When the senior management is distracted, other stuff changes, right? So the core business will suffer, at least temporarily. And then this year, having gotten Israel in order and gotten a more stable team in place to manage it all, we bumped right back up into our path, our expected growth path of over 1,600. But there's definitely a cost that you see right there of the attention being paid elsewhere. So we started with 111 finalists, and then you can see as we add new programs, it takes some time. Most of that growth is in the fourth and fifth year, but we will get to over 1,000 finalists. Over that period of 5 years, we would see 34,000 applications, we would expect to, over 3,000 finalists, and a total of $50 million in awards given out over that time. So these are our goals, and this is literally the deck that I showed my board to explain why we should do this. Okay, any questions on that? Good.
What's the chance of Russia becoming a fourth?
So Russia's on my chart. I'll show it to you, and we can debate whether I've placed it in the right place. So I literally, in my application to business school at MIT, in my essay, they asked, what do you want to do for your career and why do you need a business education? I said I needed to get some background on finance and business skills, et cetera. And then I was going to go to work at a consulting company, which I did. I went to Bain. And then I was going to leave Bain to launch my own company, which I did, which is MassChallenge. And then I was going to return to Russia and radically overhaul the environment, the entrepreneurial ecosystem and the venture community to enable rapid entrepreneurial growth across Russia, and that could be the single most positive contribution to humanity because of the intense amount of talent and resources within Russia that frankly are not being utilized very efficiently. That this would be one of the fastest, easiest ways to change the world. So I'm interested in it, but as you know, Russia is not always the easiest place to operate, right? And there's significant geopolitical risk. The infrastructure is not totally in place to support entrepreneurs. And as a small startup that needs funding, I have to follow where I can get the revenue, where I can get the funding, and where I have the opportunities for significant growth and success. So Russia is definitely on our list. I would guess it's probably not 4, but it's also probably in the top 10. So it's probably not 20 or 15, but I don't know beyond 4 maybe. And this is part of what we do working with Skolkovo and other partners. This exchange helps us to see how good quality the teams are. Is there a mentorship system in place? Because we need some of those raw materials to work. Like our system is a catalyst, but we need the ingredients. We need like the raw materials in place. So I think we will do it for sure, but probably not next year. So we'll see.
Clearly don't see any growth in Boston.
Yeah, it's like incremental. I think we just, for our model, we just said, call it 5% growth or 10% growth or something. The fact is that at about 1,000, you're at minimum efficient scale. You don't need that many more. So we actually discourage almost more applications because it depends where you're getting them from to some extent. So we've done a really good job of penetrating MIT and Harvard and Northeastern and all the universities. So the top 50 teams out of MIT we apply every single year. The top 50 out of Harvard every single year. So we already have access to very high quality teams. And when you double or triple the number of applications, the vast majority of them are low quality. It's like the average Joe off the street that read about it in a newspaper but doesn't really know what they're doing. So we have an application fee on the web. When you enter, there's an application fee. But if we know it's a legitimate startup, like coming out of the MIT labs or through a partner, then we waive the fee. We don't actually want the fee, but it's to discourage random outsiders from clogging the system and to discourage people from entering 20 times just to see which one sticks. So I'm pretty content with what we have now. I mean, I think it probably will go up, but I wanted most of the numbers to be in the new. I was also proving a point to my board, which was that I really think we need international expansion. So I didn't want to show too much growth in Boston.
But you had the same picture in Israel last time. It grows up until 2006.
Yeah, and then the sense is that the market gets saturated. That we grab all of the valuable demand, and then we have to move on to a new market.
Not in the UK and other markets. There we see
Well, the UK is bigger. You know, Israel's only 7 million people. There's more than that in London alone. And then also UK being a global city, London in particular being a global city, will attract people from all over. So in the short term, in fact, what we expect is that many of the Israeli applicants will go to London or to Boston. Because what Israel wants is access to a market. They're not big, Israel's not big enough to grow. They have great talent, great research and development, great technology, but they need to leave Israel. Not permanently, they'll maintain their headquarters and R&D, but they need to set up a sales and marketing office somewhere else. So that's where there's not as much growth there. And then I think UK around here will roughly stabilize and hold. Somewhere, so that's what each of these will eventually grow to roughly that size, and then either we keep adding, and we'll see. I mean, it's a projection, so it's all made up. I don't know, it's a guess. It could be that Boston actually continues to grow dramatically, I'm not sure. But we don't need it to. All right, we move on to the next one. So why international expansion? And this is, oops, I keep forgetting that. So this is one of the most important questions. You got to make sure that you really have a good reason for going international, because it is an enormous waste of time and money if you actually don't know what you're doing or you don't know why you're going. Obviously, all of this will change over time. Like as we enter markets, we learn more, we go back and refine this. So it's not a static document or plan, but you do really need to think it through up front and make sure it's worth it to try international expansion. And by the way, these handouts, you might not all have them, but there's some handouts here that have all of the text, all of the questions, and some sub-bullets for you to think about you can take home. So this is how we looked at our adjacency model. This is a little bit confusing, I get it, it's a complicated graph, but here's the idea. All right, so I'm a former Bain consultant, and the Bain strategy model is become dominant in one thing, in one industry, one product, one market. You have to be number one or number two. Number three doesn't count. You have to own your market. You are the dominant player, okay? Then you have advantages because you're dominant. You probably have higher profit margins. You have better access to resources. You have locked up certain partners. You have an advantage. So then you create an adjacent business, leveraging your advantage in the first market to become dominant in that market. And then once you're dominant in two, you enter a third, and you keep spiraling around. And the trick is don't extend too far, right? You only want to go to a nearby adjacency where you have a strong advantage. Don't go 5 adjacencies away where your advantage doesn't hold. So, and the adjacencies that you can look at, they vary by industry and company, but basically you could expand geographically, right? If I am, let's say it's Nike, right? Nike, if I'm in its early stages, I'm the dominant seller of men's running shoes, okay? So, and maybe I'm only in North America. So or I'm only in the US, so I could expand into Canada and Mexico, and now I have North America, right? Or I could expand into Europe, so I could do the same thing, just men's running shoes. Or I could target a new kind of customer. I could make women's running shoes instead of men's, right? And now I can increase my scale and my growth. Or this one would be moving in the value chain, right? Maybe I only design and sell, but now I want to manufacture as well, because I will find further advantages in that. I'll have an advantage in manufacturing because I know what the demand is like, and so I can be a better manufacturer, et cetera. Or I could offer a new product or service, so instead of to my existing customers, so instead of men's running shoes, I could also add men's tennis shoes, men's CrossFit shoes, or men's athletic clothing, shorts and t-shirts, and et cetera, right? And then this would also be sort of moving up and down the supply chain, right? So when we looked at that in our world, we looked at how can we increase our impact? If we want to be globally, if we want to foster this global renaissance, we already are very good in Boston. We're essentially, I think, the center of the Boston ecosystem. So how do we leverage that and extend to more markets? How do we create a bigger impact? So we looked at what we already do is this kind of dark blue. That's what we felt like we already do those things pretty well. And then we thought we can extend in certain areas to create bigger impact. So we could go into a new type of customer. Right now we help early stage startups. We could go to more funded growth stage startups, more established startups, and helping corporations to be more innovative. But we decided that this is not as aligned with our core mission of the catalyzing the renaissance, because that is mostly driven by the early stage, and also that the skill sets needed to help these types of businesses are different. They need very different things, right? So then an early stage where we have strength, and so we won't be able to leverage our resources as well to get there. We are interested in doing new products and services, which could be introducing a fund. Right now, we only offer access to resources like an office space and mentors. We offer digital access to resources, training and online videos, and we offer funding via grants. We could offer funding with equity stake through a separate vehicle or through another entity. So we're interested in that, and we'll investigate it and see if we can do that. It remains one of the #1 complaints of our startups that funding is too conservative, too hard to raise. It still slows them down, even though they have done a pretty good job of raising money. So if we can enter that market, we can disrupt it, make funding cheaper, easier to get access to, it would help our startups. Helping to promote the supply of startups, meaning helping to market the idea of being more innovative. So helping to develop more curriculum, making it easier for somebody to decide, I should become an entrepreneur and I should launch a new business. And we already do that stuff. We do a lot of events. We already do a lot of marketing to universities and schools. So that's a pretty easy extension of what we already do, to just formalize that into more of a training curriculum that we could share at very low cost. But the main area where we wanted to focus was on expanding geographically, which is through Europe and Middle East, and through the US and into South America as well. Okay, did you guys get this? Any key questions here? So promoting the supply of accelerators, that was like we had a bunch of other accelerators that are copycat models of us. So we thought we could, for instance, this is what we considered. Could we create like a white paper that says, this is how you launch MassChallenge? Just take it. Like, take our business model, here it is. Anybody who wants it, do it on your own. And if we could get 10,000 people around the world to attempt to launch their own accelerator using our model, probably maybe 1,000 of those might vaguely work. And maybe 100 of those would be pretty good. And maybe 10 of those would be amazing, and then we could partner with them. So we were thinking that might be a faster avenue, is to just give away the model and then try to partner. But it's actually very difficult to document what we do. We've tried, and we can barely document it for ourselves internally, so it's very hard to document it and give it to somebody else. And there's so much customization in other countries because of varying degrees of infrastructure and regulation. So we just determined that it's too difficult to do it, and it won't work right now. But as we expand geographically, we may develop that expertise, and so we may come back to it. But right now, it's not the one. So what we did is, oops, sorry. Keep forgetting that, sorry. So we prioritized adjacencies that align with our skill sets and that generate revenue quickly. This is how we made our decision. All right, so the size of the bubble represents our perception of whether there's long-term strategic value. Bigger bubble means it's more value to us in our mission of catalyzing a renaissance. Smaller bubble means not as closely aligned with our mission, okay? Higher it is on the y-axis is how good are we at doing that thing already? Like, do we already have the skill set required to execute on that or not? Higher means yes, we are pretty good at that. Lower means no, we're not that good at that. And then how quickly, on the x-axis, how quickly will it generate revenue? Because we don't have any extra money. Like, we're kind of a poor nonprofit. So we don't have a bank account with $10 million in it. We spend every dollar we raise, and then we raise again for the next year. So we need something that will return money to us quickly. We can't invest and wait too long. And internationally, there's huge demand to understand innovation ecosystems and to grow. So we have lots of people internationally offering us money to work with them. So it's very quick to get revenue. New products and services like a fund, I think we could do that. Like, we have a lot of the expertise and assets required. And we could get the money, but if you think about a fund, right, isn't going to return any real money for 5+ years. And we need money now. So we can't wait that long. So it's interesting to us because the potential revenue is significant, but it's delayed. And we can't handle the delay. We need money right away. So we'll look at both, but we're prioritizing new geographies, right? Because that's what we're good at, is launching MassChallenge. We did it in Boston very effectively, and we have a really good script and strategy for how to do that we believe we can replicate anywhere in the world. So that's the one that we adopted. All right, so and then, oops, I keep doing that. So here were some of the reasons that we gave, and this was our original deck. So our board didn't totally agree with this, and I'll tell you, we had a debate about our points, and they're smarter than me, and they had better ideas. So we've improved this, but this is where we started. We thought, okay, so some of the benefits are the scale will make us more efficient. So we can, we need software because we operate at large scale already. So we already use software for the competition part of it and the accelerator part of it, and but it's hard to hire developers, they're expensive. If we have 10 locations, then the technology spend is smaller relative to the total revenue of the organization, so it'll be easier for us to do certain parts of the business because we'll be more efficient at scale. And our brand and other things like that will be easier to support. We also could reach more startups and more funding and resources. We could optimize resources across the geographies, and we can enter into some growth markets. So for instance, so the US GDP is not projected to grow at 10%, right? It's a low growth market, even though it's stable and good. But there are markets with 10% growth in them. And if we have an office there, we can help our Boston-based startups to enter that market and capture the growth, right? So if we have an office in China, we can develop startups with technology out of MIT in Boston that can then enter China and capture that big market and all the growth. So that would be an advantage. And then the fact is that there's plenty of money internationally. We're getting almost like turning away money. There's so much flowing in. So we have a lot of opportunity. So what the board basically said was, scale is irrelevant, don't worry about it. Like what the real advantage here is the network benefits, the access to more resources and the ability to make connections that are optimal. So an investor from Dubai has a ton of money, but doesn't know where to find startups. Like wants to invest in them, but just doesn't have any, doesn't know how that system works. But if we can enter that market, then we can help them to allocate that funding to great startups in Boston or media resources in London that can benefit. That is where the real opportunity is, they felt, as well as helping us to reach more startups and support our global mission. All right, any questions on that one, on the why? You see how that's how our logic was. We had multiple options, and this is important to think through, right? If you're gonna do international expansion, that means you're not doing something else, right? You're gonna put attention and resources into expanding, which means you can't develop that other product, right? There's something else you're giving up. And this is where you have to be very thoughtful and think, all right, what am I losing by choosing this international expansion? And which one is more important? Which one gives me revenue faster? Which one helps me to survive, is more durable? Long-term versus short-term trade-offs. It's very important to think through that opportunity cost. So that was our approach as we laid out all of the options that we had, that we thought we had, to expand our impact. And then we selected this one based on our existing ability to deliver it, the speed at which it would develop revenue for us, and its contribution to our long-term mission. And that was expansion. So we adopted it as the ultimate choice for us. All right, so then what countries will you focus on? So we've decided to go, international. So which countries, where will we go first, okay? So we already have Israel, so it's not on the map. But what we did is a similar 2x2x2, because I'm a consultant and that's what we do, which is on the y-axis here is, and also our board didn't love this model, so this is not a perfect model, but we used it and I think it's worked well for us. So on the y-axis is how strong are the partnerships we have in that location, right? Like, do we know the CEOs of major corporations? Do we have access to the senior politicians? Do we have access to the people that lead that economy? And then how quickly do we think we can convert on those relationships and generate revenue? And that is on the x-axis. And then the size of the bubble is our estimate of how attractive is the market, especially relative our existing markets, right? So for instance, UK pops very nicely, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why. One of the attractive elements of it is that very similar culture, same language, right? There's a lot of overlap in our markets, so we know a lot of people, there's a UK trade and investment office in Boston, and they're super helpful. And they make introductions on our behalf, so it makes it easy to get introduced to people in the UK. So we have a lot of overlap and ease of access that we can leverage. And so now France, for instance, is very close to the UK. So once we launch UK, it's not as attractive to go to France because I can already reach French resources from London. Right? Then I would rather go to Berlin, a little bit further away, but still in the same approximate time zone and market, or Spain, so I can access a different language, right? I can access a different population. If I'm in Spain, then that helps me in South America. Or if I'm in South America, which we have a lot of access there, then that helps me with Spain because I've already got Spanish-speaking population under my control, or under my influence. So it's all about how well does it fit within. It's not about necessarily what's the most attractive market overall, but for us, relative our stage. So UK popped because basically the Prime Minister invited us to launch. So talk about pretty good connections. We have a connection into the Prime Minister who specifically identified us as valuable, invited us and said, I will introduce you to whomever you need. Tell me who you needed to talk to and we'll introduce you and you'll get there. So we know we can get through the elite very quickly and find the money that we need. We went for a month, a little bit less than a month, to London to investigate, and we came home with $400,000 committed. So it was very quick to raise money, and we had easy access to get to people. It was easy to give them a pitch because all of our decks are already in English, so we didn't have to translate anything. We understand the culture reasonably well. It's a little different, but similar. So that one was an easy one. And these have all shifted. These are all shifting around constantly. Like Switzerland is an interesting one where I just happened to meet a Swiss billionaire who runs a really successful company there, and he fell in love with the idea and invited us to go to Switzerland and is offering us already a lot of money and influence and connections. So Switzerland might normally have been further down, but we just moved it up because we just got that key connection that makes it easier. And I didn't think it was that attractive initially because it's a small country, but actually there's enormous amounts of money in Switzerland, right? So it's the world's private banker, and it's trusted neutral ground. So Davos meets there. All of the world's elite come to Switzerland at one point. So for us to have a presence there gives us access into that elite privilege power circle for other places. Right? Similarly, the UK has a big global presence because it used to have colonies. So if we want to go into India, being in London will help. Right? We have easy access into the elite Indian population, right, through all their colonies. Israel, which has a large diaspora of Jewish people around the world, is another great hub. If you're strong in Israel, you can leverage connections from Israel to get into almost any country in the world. So we're thinking still of how does that country aid my next step? And the one after that. And that's what leads to our attractiveness. So UK is we're doing it. That one's green, it's on. These are all in consideration. You can see Russia here where we do have good connections, and I do think that we could get money. But the attractiveness is, I would say Russia is a little challenging for us in a couple of ways, right? It's a large country. It is not a famously transparent country, okay? It can be difficult place in which to operate. It is a different language. Most people speak English in the ecosystem, but still there's different language, there's different customs, there's different laws. The market isn't as developed yet. It is making good progress, but it's still early. And then there's geopolitical risk, which is not insignificant, right? So that makes it attractive, but not as attractive as some of the others, which is why I think we'll come back to it. But it's on the list, and we're interested. All right, does this make sense? So basically, you can't really see the lines, but there's a quadrant here, and we kind of focus on the upper right quadrant first, and then they move over time, and more will pop into that section. Yeah, questions, go ahead. Start here, yeah.
You have commented on Russia. Why is it so small? What about the Texas? Texas is about as attractive.
Yeah, so Texas so we have good contacts in Texas, and there is a lot of money in Texas, but it's a pretty weak startup ecosystem. So the main value so Austin, Texas has like South by Southwest. There's a strong creative population there, music and arts, which is attractive. It would help us with Mexico and South America to some extent, but it's kind of far away from Boston, and it's not really that robust of an ecosystem. So we are investigating it, but unless they start throwing money at us, like right now we don't have an easy access to just somebody who's going to write a big check. So we're being friendly with them, but we already send our startups there to go work on oil and gas and aerospace. So the startups already get access to what they need. It's not as important to us. We'll see. I'm interested in it. And all of the key thing here is, right, is recognize this is not quantitative, right? This is basically, this is a good exercise for you to, anytime you're trying to make a hard decision between multiple options, build some kind of a 2x2. Just guess, like, what are the key criteria? What do we care about? Put them on the axes, and then just bring in your team and say, all right, where should we put this one? What do you think? And it's a good way to debate. And you start debating and say, no, that's not true. That's a much more attractive market than this, whatever. And then you can reach a consensus. It's not scientific, but it's, you know, poll-based on your team's expertise. Colorado also, I don't know, it's not that big of an ecosystem. It is interesting, but we don't know that many people there. So, right, it is a pretty big circle because it is attractive in a sense, but I just don't know anybody there. So we don't have easy access to revenue and we don't have good partnerships.
How about the x-axis? Slowest speed to revenue.
Yeah, because I don't know anybody. That's why largely. So I think if we knew more people, we could get speed to revenue. This is why my board didn't like this one, because they didn't like this model because they said that these two axes are correlated, and so it's not the right model. And we have since hashed out some other models, but honestly, I still like this one the best, and I still use it myself. But as I noted, like I made this up. This is not a real model, and it's not perfect. They're correct. These two things are correlated. It's not the correct way to do it, but. So that's why you see kind of a line here. Brazil is overfished. We went to Brazil and looked at it, and there's just we ran into every other accelerator in the world while we were there. There's just everybody is trying to do it. It's so hot, and it's more expensive to get a developer in Brazil than in New York. It's gotten way too hot. It's too expensive, it's overhyped, and I was not that impressed with the startups and stuff I found. I felt like it was the false choice. Like it sounds great and it should be good, but it was chaotic and confusing, and everybody else was there, so it became too difficult. Whereas Colombia was like quietly sitting by themselves doing amazing things. So I went to Colombia thinking it would be a bad ecosystem and that it would be kind of a waste of time. But they paid me to go. And I said, all right, I got to make revenue. I'll go. So I went, and I was pretty blown away with the quality of the startups. A lot of the Colombian upper echelon, the elite, they all come to Boston for college. They're all like Harvard, MIT, Northeastern, BU people. So they actually all speak English very well. They understand the US innovation ecosystem, and they've been copying it for 10 years. So it's actually pretty well developed. And their startups are really solid, and a lot of them are targeting the US market in areas where we can help them. So we had one of our winners from 2 years ago, or maybe last year, was a Colombian team. It was a cosmetic surgeon from Colombia, which is a big industry. But he had a case where there was a child burned in a car accident very badly, and they needed to do a skin graft, and it was very difficult because the child had lost a lot of the skin. And when you do a skin graft, you're basically taking the same size skin and replacing it in a new place, so it's not really that efficient. But what he figured out how to do was to create a matrix in which you can take a small amount of skin and very rapidly over 2 days grow it to more than 10 times the size of the original, almost 20 times the size of the original. So now you could take a smaller skin patch and grow it much larger, and he's been using it in Colombia already for years, but nobody at Partners Healthcare in Boston had ever heard of it. They thought it was fascinating and amazing. It works. He has real patients that have used it. But so now we can easily find him the money to go through the FDA approval process and start using it in the US and elsewhere. So I was just impressed. They have very good hard science technology startups I was not expecting.
John, you said that Texas has a really weak startup ecosystem, but you don't have two European countries with a really strong startup ecosystem. I mean Spain and Finland. You have Germany, you have France, but you don't have
Yeah. That's true. So this is not totally complete. Spain, we have thought a lot about. Finland would be interesting too, I agree. But it's a small country. It would be very interesting. I have thought about it. And actually, in many ways, because Russia can be difficult to operate, but I like Russia and I want to have a presence, Finland would be a good, close, approximate neighbor, right? But has European laws, so it's more integrated into the West. But I think probably in Scandinavia, I would just service out of Berlin or maybe Denmark and try to reach all of them. Maybe Sweden.
Number one in Europe by angel ecosystem and angel investment.
Yeah, so Spain is an interesting. Yeah, so Spain is an interesting one, and we've looked at it, but it's kind of chaotic still, and the quality I'm not super impressed with. They do have a lot of interest in it, and some things in Barcelona are very impressive. I hear mixed things. But we will go to Spain for sure. And Spain also ties nicely to our South American contacts because of Spanish, so we'll leverage those. Portugal is also interesting. I mean, there's a lot of interest, but I don't want to be too clear. I don't want to have like Spain and Portugal, because I got to be on every continent, so I got to spread them out a little bit. Yeah, Sweden would be interesting too. So China, so this is an interesting one where it's not as correlated to the, we don't have super strong partnerships with China. I do know a couple of, I have some good contacts there, or I could get some, but I don't yet have a lot of relationships or anything. But they keep calling us and offering huge amounts of money, like ridiculous amounts of money, to go to China, but we're not ready. It would just kill us. Like, we're too small. We don't know anything about the culture. We don't speak the language. It's a notoriously closed system with a lot of corruption and favor swapping and nepotism. So you need to have a local partner, and we don't. And I don't know how to find a local partner. It would be such a distraction that it would likely kill the rest of the business. And we would only, we'd be placing all of our bets on whether we can make China work or not. So it worries me. We'll definitely do it, but my hope is I want to try to do Europe and South America first, which South America is similar time zone to us, is easier to deal with. Europe is similar culture. Time zone is not great, but from London, then you're close to all the other time zones. And then probably march through the Middle East and into Asia that way, so that the other offices can be serviced by our new office. So I don't have to do it from Boston. But we'll see. And then I think for China, we would probably do Korea or Singapore first and get a base there, and then try to get into China. So this is a fun debate. We could do this all day, but this is kind of how we thought through it. And like I said, it's not a perfect model, but it worked for us. So I don't want to run out of time. So with which products will you go? So that's another concern when you're going into a market. You pick a country, and then you got to decide which one of your products you're going to use to enter. All of them? Are they all relevant? Is it just one? Or which mix are you going to use? And how will you actually enter the market? We did this in a simplistic way. We don't have products, really. So I'll tell you what we did. So I have them both grouped together, how we go to market, which products. This is how we do it. Like, you're seeing it. This is our entry into a new country. We sell a product that's a lower cost product that builds relationships with people in that environment. So in Mexico, we work with the government of Guadalajara, basically, which is the innovation area in Mexico, and they pay us for a consulting agreement, and we go there and speak at events. We bring people from there over to Boston and integrate them with our mentors, similar to what we're doing here. Skolkova is an example of this as a reasonably low-cost product that isn't a long-term commitment, but enables us to learn more about the environment, enables the environment to learn more about us, and then we can judge to see whether that bubble is getting bigger or moving on our graph to become more attractive. So, and this also gives us money. So, oh, sorry, I keep forgetting that I didn't move you guys. Here, this is it. So we basically have deals that are, it takes us about 6 months to close. Typically, sometimes they pop faster. They're not huge dollar amounts. They're in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Some are bigger, some are smaller, but roughly speaking. And these are they're low risk engagements because we sign a contract before we deliver. Right, so I don't have to spend a lot of money. I know I'm getting paid when I show up. And they're reasonably high margin. It's not like, it doesn't take a year worth of effort to deliver. We're already good at it. We already know how to do this. So we have relatively good margins on it. And then we get to promote to applicants who can enter, which is also good for us. And it enables us to learn about the new geography and build better connections and partnerships so that we could decide to launch, and it would be easier for us to launch. So we created this kind of like trial size MassChallenge taster, which is similar to what you guys will see through the boot camp and through the mentor matching and through the ultimate pitch competition. And then we are doing this in Colombia, Mexico, Switzerland. We're also doing it in Russia and a couple of other places now. And then we decide when to launch a new office, and that takes us about 9 to 12 months, and it's actually 500 to 600K to launch. These are old numbers. And then the first year budget is around $2 million plus whatever the cost of office space is. This is difficult, and it takes a lot of planning, and you have to spend money before you get it. So we do this as our opening, and then we segue to this where we see the opportunity is available. So if somebody writes us a check for 600 grand, then we can say, okay, let's send a team over and we'll actually do a full investigation for a launch, and then decide to do the launch. So this is how we thought through the products, how we enter. So you know, thinking that like this is our main product. This is like Boston Accelerator is our main product. That's our main existence. We created a trial size small version so that we could enter the market because it's too difficult to sell our product. Right? We need $2 to $3 million. We need to have a network of mentors. It's a very long, complicated sales cycle. So we can't just enter and say, sure, hey, you want to buy a nuclear power plant? Right? It's a slow process. So in order to accomplish that, we need something to break into the market first that's smaller and easier. In your guys' world, that might be having a freemium product that you can offer within the market that's free. Get people used to the brand, trying the software, and then start to upsell them on the more complicated aspects of the software as you advance it, or having it more customized or localized or whatever. But you have to think through what's the easiest thing I can sell into the market to get a foothold, and then how do I escalate from there? All right, so then another big question is how do you staff it? This is actually one of the most difficult things. I find actually staffing in general to be arguably the most difficult aspect of any startup. Being able to attract really high quality talent when you have no money and brand is not easy. So you have to find people that are aligned with your mission, that can be motivated to try to grow revenue and succeed. But it's difficult. And then if you do grow and succeed, now you typically have very junior people that may not be ready to take on that role for a company that's 5 times as big. Right? So, and then it can become very challenging dynamics, and how do you staff? So that's hard enough in Boston, and then you think, okay, we're going to launch a UK office. How do I hire somebody in London, right, to run an office, which is really complicated? Only I and my co-founder have done it, really, and know how to do it. We don't have a playbook, so it's not an easy to define role. They have to be essentially a founder and create a new office, not just run an office, but create it and then run it. So that's a really significant challenge. I'm sorry, I keep doing that. So this is how you will staff it. So this is how we thought through it. Well, for about 6 months to 9 months before we decided to do this, we knew it was coming, so we hired a bunch more people in Boston. And think of your staffing this way. You need your direct staff, right? Like I need people in London to run that office. But there's also a significant cost indirectly for my current staff, because Maya needs to support my international travels. She helps to organize and plan this trip. She's a Boston employee, right? And I have, accountants in Boston have to now deal with international financial transfers, setting up a new legal entity and how they relate. So it taxes your existing team, not just the distant team. And those are actually very significant costs. So we added more staff in Boston. And then we used our existing network in Boston to hire somebody that we know to run our London office. He's British, but he was in Boston for years, and we know him very well through the startup ecosystem. And so we hired him and then sent him to London to go hire the other people. And then we spent a lot of time there, but it's definitely not easy. We also waited until we were stable. This is really important. So we were in an old office, we were in a different office space for the first 4 years. We just moved into a new office space. That was a huge shift for us, a small company, negotiating a 5-year contract across multiple options. We are a nonprofit, so real estate is expensive. We got a free lease. Literally, we do not pay a single dollar rent. All of the air conditioning and heating is free. The internet is free. We got free furniture, everything for a 5-year period. So that was a really complicated negotiation process. We wanted to wait until it was done before we launched a new initiative, because we wouldn't be able to do the two together, because this needed my attention. And once we got it, now we know, hey, look, we just got office space for 5 years for free, so Boston is stable. I can divert my attention for a minute, and Boston won't fall apart because we hired a bunch of new people and we got a new office. So I stabilized the home market before we started expansion, which I think is very important. And this was we basically had to design a new structure. We used to only have MassChallenge Boston that ran everything. So we broke out a new headquarter entity, and we moved all the expensive all the scalable items into headquarters and leave the local stuff in the local offices, right? So like corporate strategy is a scalable thing that has to be in the center. You can't run corporate strategy out of London or Boston. It has to be above all of the other locations so that it can coordinate them. The brand is global, right? So you can't have a different logo in each office. You need to have the same basic corporate brand. You'll have some marketing locally because they'll need relationships with the local media and other stuff, but the corporate part of it has to be at the center. The software and IT has to be scalable, right? It's super expensive. You want everybody on the same platform so everything works across the sites. There are some sponsors and partners that are inherently global, right? Some of big companies that have like Verizon is a huge company, or Fidelity. They're interested in being a global brand affiliate, not just a Boston one in some cases. Some of our curriculum and content we could create in Boston and share everywhere. Certainly, let's say Russia would want some localized content in Russian language, unique to Russian market, but the basic elements of how to deliver a good pitch, how to divide up equity, or et cetera, those things are all pretty constant across the world. So we can build some of that in Boston and share. The basic HR policy, corporate accounting, and then general operating guidelines for each of the offices. Those things can all be at the center. And then locally, you have your responsibility for local funding and budget, local sponsors, local marketing. The office space has to be managed locally. So we divided up all the responsibilities. Similarly, for you guys, if you have a software product, what is it in the new office? Is it sales? Are there developers there? Is there customer service there? Or are you going to have a time delay for customer service? They have to call Russia and maybe they don't get an English speaker, right? Or they don't get a speaker in their native language that understands their customs, or do you have to do that locally? It'll be different for everybody, but you have to think through which parts of the business exist where, and how do they relate to each other in the org structure. And this is kind of how we broke it out. We also felt this would be more efficient, because if you have a senior level marketing person in every office adds a lot of cost. If you can organize that all in the center, you can reduce the cost of each local program and concentrate the expensive people in the headquarter so that they can be shared across multiple programs. All right. Oh, I did that again. I keep doing that. Here, sorry. So this is the, we just moved the most expensive people up into the center. That reflects the previous slide again, and then leaving the local staff locally. All right, so a little bit more efficient. So you have to think about how the costs relate to each other and how they operate. Another, like a big challenge we're still figuring out, like we hired this founder type to run London. He's an entrepreneur, right? So he doesn't really follow instructions that well, right? So how much can we tell him to do, and how much freedom do we have to give him and just say, I don't know, figure it out? Because when we try to tell him what to do, he doesn't necessarily listen. So there's certain things we have to say, no, with fact, with certainty, no question asked, you have to use our software, period. Don't even talk about it. Not going to happen. Must be, right? And then other areas you say, okay, I'll give you freedom on that one. I'd prefer if you used our tagline or our pitch, but you can develop your own pitch because it's a different market and different customers. Just kind of paint within the lines so we can give some boundaries, like don't say these words, don't pitch it that way, and we can approve it. Like we have approval rights. But you have to go through basically your entire business and say, who has the decision? Who owns that decision? Is that local? Is that corporate? Do I have input and you get the decision? Do I have to, you make the decision and I get to approve or veto? And then how do you make that a process that's streamlined, that doesn't now waste hours of my day for him emailing me to say, I want to hire a receptionist. Can I do that? I don't want to have that decision. That's your decision. You own your budget. But there's a fine line where it's like, what if it's a senior executive? What if they're really expensive? What if I totally disagree? Like, why would you hire that kind of a person? That's a waste of money. If if he fails and we need to get rid of him, or he leaves, we're stuck with his office the way he designed it. So I do care about those decisions because I ultimately own them if he leaves. So, but it's really tricky. I have to also let him make those decisions and not get in the way. It's very, very challenging to figure out that role between the offices. All right, so that kind of segue, and now what's the operating model? So additionally on those decision-making levels, you also have financial transactions. How does money flow between the two entities? Who has the bank account? Do you both have bank accounts? Is there a corporate bank account? So what we decided was, and how do we fund them? How do they fund us, right? If we're building software for London, then they should pay us for that software. If we're managing the global brand, it's almost like a franchise, right? So they should pay a fee in. That said, they're smaller and younger than us, and they might need money up front, and they might not be able to pay us a fee for a while. So what we decided was each year, the planning year, there would be no fee, but then after that, each year we would ask the office to pay $250,000 into Boston, into the headquarter entity, to cover the cost of all the CXOs and the software development and the brand development, et cetera, so that we have the resources to support them properly. And then that would, it took us 3 years to break even fully. We think it might take them a little bit longer, so we said in the 5th year, we'll bump the fee up to $500,000, and then it would stay that way forever. Okay? So, and we have debated whether we might do it as a loan or debt, that we would say, well, you technically owe us 250 grand, but you can't pay it, so we'll defer payment up or something. We haven't quite figured that out, but that would give us. So this is our expectations of what they would have for cash at the end of the year in each of the markets. We just used the Boston numbers and then added in the 250K and some other assumptions in a model that isn't shown here. But we estimated that they would hit a pretty significant deficit, and that if necessary, we might have to cover that for them or waive the 250K temporarily. But Boston went negative $600,000 in our 2nd year, which we just borrowed from the next year. So basically, we spent more than we had for revenue for our 2nd year, and we just delayed payments into the 3rd year, and then had our sponsors prepay on January 1st so we could pay off the previous year's debt, right? So we just borrowed from ourselves, kind of cash flow shuffling, and we think they could handle this as well, and we might have to support them, but we also want them to be poor so that they are lean. Right? If London has too much money, I don't want them all riding around in limousines, and like they should feel poor and keep their costs down. So I want to push them a little bit to the brink, but not break them. So this was how we figured that operating model. Whoops. And then we also did a lot more financial analysis, but I wasn't totally prepared to share it. But we did a lot of analysis about the headquarters and how much it will cost us to go and open these locations. How much money do we have to load up front? And there's a lot of questions around for us, like, what if London fails miserably? What if they just bomb? It just doesn't work. They don't build the right network. They don't get any applications. They don't raise the funding. There's a scandal or a crisis, and they have to shut down. It essentially challenges our entire growth hypothesis, right? We're betting really big on London working, because if London fails, it'll be hard to do the 2nd one, right? And it will be an enormous amount of wasted resources. So we really need to pay attention and get London right, but we're not swimming in extra cash. So it's a real trick to spend enough time and effort on getting it right and making sure it's safe. What if the 2nd or 3rd one fails? Do we bail them out? Do we say, okay, we have enough money at headquarters, we'll pay for your losses and we'll cover it and give you another year? How long do you subsidize that new office before you say, you know what, screw it, you're done. We're just shutting down Berlin. It's not going to happen, right? So that relationship is very tricky because we need it to work for our brand, but we can't let them know that we would just be like, cover any of their debts and we'll take care of them. We need them to feel like they could die if they don't do a good job. So that trade-off is very, very challenging and tricky. All right, so how are you going to fund it? This is actually some of the funding that we looked through. So if we have for headquarters, we would estimate that in the 1st year we need about $2 million, and in the growing up to around $3 million over time to cover all the salaries and the new hires and stuff. If we start charging these fees of 250K and then growing them up to 500, remember on the first growth curve, most of the growth is at the end, in years 4 and 5. So in the early years, those fees don't represent that much money. So for this year, Boston can pay $500K. That's the only one that's advanced. Then next year you get $500K from Boston, $250K from London. Then we start to grow into more reasonable, we'll get 1.2 million and 1.7 million, et cetera. But in the first year, we're running a deficit in headquarters, right? And then that deficit grows and becomes pretty significant unless we fund it. So this was essentially the justification slide for we need to raise some money to support our geographic expansion. We can't do this with just our operating budget from Boston. And then that segued into our, what if we got, if we got some funding, if we could raise $3 million, we got a commitment of $3 million, $1 million each year, we erase our headquarters deficits. So this is what we pitched to our board, and they said, okay, you definitely should raise some money, we get that, but $3 million is not enough because there's no operating cash here, and you're ignoring cash flow, which could kill you. So what you really should do is go raise $10 million. And then that'll be sufficient, and that will cover you if any of the offices start to struggle. And then at the next board meeting, they said, you know what, go raise $20 million. Go get $20 million, and that will cover your growth around the globe, and you can do it faster with less risk because you don't have to be counting pennies. You can actually invest in proper hires and other stuff like that. So we ended up settling on a $20 million, but this was the original justification and question of the board. And so we actually have outperformed in Boston on our fundraising expectations. So we actually have a surplus in Boston, and we don't need the 20 million right away. Like basically we generated this $1 million for ourselves. So for the first, so we're going to postpone the $20 million raise until we get London up and running so we can focus on that. And then we'll go after the 20 million next year, but we're good for the immediate short term because we have a good revenue year. All right, so this was, and then we were saying, okay, then the board wanted to know, what will you do if you're collecting all these fees from the regions, where does it go? Like, what do you do with that? So there's a deficit for some time, but then you'll be collecting a bunch of money every year from all over the world, and what are you going to spend it on? You don't need to keep hiring people in headquarters, so where does it go? And so our hypothesis is that that would allow us to the liberty to launch more products and services, like to hire somebody to investigate launching a fund or improving the software or other things that we could offer to startups. And also, it would enable us to give sort of scholarships to places where we think we should have an office, but can't pony up the 600 grand or the 2 million, right? So if we wanted to be in Ghana, it might be harder. It would be a great place to be, great potential impact, but it might be harder to raise the money. So then we could use this extra money from the wealthier countries to help fund entry into some of the less developed countries to help grow those markets out. So this was part of that debate. And basically that's it. This was our summary slide. That's our impact. That's what we think we can achieve. We need to get, at this point we thought $3 million. And then we asked our board, hey, these are some options and ideas for where we might be able to get the money. What do you think? Right? Is the strategy sound compelling? Do you get it? Do you believe in it? How much is $3 million enough? How much money do you think we need? And then would you help us raise the money? And they said, yes, it's compelling, although they wanted us to talk more emotionally about the impact. Then this was pretty raw, quantitative. They wanted to hear more of a story about the entrepreneurs that we're going to help and what that will mean for the world. So we've been working on that pitch. And then they said 3 million is definitely not enough. You need at least 10. And then 2 minutes later, I think 20, you need 20 million. And then will you help us to raise the additional capital? They said yes. And they actually told us they thought we should go and get one very wealthy entity like in the Middle East or somewhere to fund all the $20 million, and they would help us to make some introductions and stuff. We investigated that path and have determined that that's almost impossible and is not the right choice, and that we're going to go back to the board and say, no, we've disproven that hypothesis. It's better to go and get $1, $2, $3 million from organizations and people, maybe 5 million tops, but nonprofits that have been around for 10 years don't raise $20 million from one entity. It's too difficult and too long and too risky. All right, so that is the end of my presentation. I think I also have used up all the time, but can I ask a couple of questions? Let me let people ask if there's any questions or thoughts. We can sort of push back a little bit because we started late. Does anybody have any questions? The key is obviously to personalize this for your own startup, but I think I wanted to intimate to you guys, that it's way more complicated than it sounds to go international. There's a lot of things you have to think about. Like, is it even the right choice? What are you trying to accomplish? How are you going to hire people? How are you going to fund it? How are you going to overcome cultural obstacles? How do you divide responsibility across the organization? There's a huge number of challenges in it. It's not trivial. And you need to do a lot of planning and checking with your advisors and others to make sure that it is viable. What else? Any other questions? You guys got it? You guys ready to conquer the world? Sure.
You have nothing about Israel's presentation, but as far as I understand, you already have some good with Israel.
Yeah, that's right. So we entered Israel first before London, and we thought we were going to do a full replication of the program similar to Boston, but in Israel. There's a very strong ties between Israel and Boston. The startup communities are very interconnected. So a lot of our mentors and judges are either Israeli or Jewish Americans with a fondness for Israel. And some of the largest donors to Israel are based in Boston. There's a crowd of very wealthy individuals that support Israel. So it was easy for us to get introductions into Israel. We entered at the very top layer with the most elite people in the startup community, and we pitched to them that we were going to do a startup accelerator there, and they said, oh God, no, don't do it. There's 25 of them already, and there's too many. Nobody needs it. It's not necessary. It's a commodity. Nobody wants it. It's dumb. Don't do it. And we were like, oh, crap. Well, there goes that idea. And then they said, but what people really need is access to the market. And if you can offer that, people will give you a lot of money and support and attention. And we were like, well, we already have access to Boston. We know everybody. That's like the core thing that we do. We know all of the people in Boston. And they were like, that is your business. Identify the best startups from Israel and give them a fast path into Boston, introduce them very quickly to the key people, help them to raise money faster, help them to penetrate customers faster. If you can do that, that's valuable. So that's what we did. So, but it's much smaller than London. It's, we have 10 Israeli teams in this year's program, 150 applicants. We basically run the competition part, and then we take 10 over to Boston, and we pay for their airfare and their housing and other stuff. We may convert that into a bigger program, but right now it's still that smaller one. So we started the main thinking around our deck with London, and that's why you see London prominent. Yes. Yes, yes. So it's one of the risks, absolutely, is that you get to the market and it turns out they don't want you. Or that it is totally different than what you expected and your product doesn't work there. Absolutely. So that's where these mini products that we're using should help us to learn that early. There's also just the markets are different. Like in Boston, we get free office space. London is like very expensive real estate and there's not a lot of vacancy. So it's much harder to get free office space in London than in Boston. Turns out looks like we might be able to do it, but it's much more difficult than we thought it would be. So each market is going to present new challenges, and that's where you just have to plan thoughtfully and anticipate like a battle everywhere you go and be ready to launch again. One last question maybe? I thought I saw, so I'll do these last two and then I'll give you guys a break.
You are going for great startups to explain them how to enter the benchmark process. But in your own presentation, you kind of don't really try to explain what would happen if you, as a company, enter the benchmark. For example, what's your current estimation, valuation, and what would be if you attract some?
It's a separate presentation, basically. So we've done some of the analysis, and it's not that easy to complete. We have a lot of data on the teams, but we don't have valuations for them at various stages, so it's difficult to project. But basically, in this early analysis, we decided that launching the fund isn't the correct path. So we did enough analysis to know it won't return enough money within the next 3 years to matter. So let's push it off and do this one first. And now we're starting to do more detailed analysis on the fund. And I think it will generate very good returns. Our teams have done very well. But it's still we're not ready yet. We want to do one thing at a time, and international expansion is the topic du jour. And then I think once we get London launched, I can free up a little bit more time and start to look more at the fund and other things. So there will be a separate slide deck on the fund.
You
Yeah.
virtual activity. And for key steps you were assessing, it's like setting the office, connection to proper network, and so on. And if you suggest something for startup scaling, say, hardware product, what would you say key parameters for this 2x2 metric?
Yeah. So I think I think if you walk through these questions, and there's more detailed questions in the handout too, then that can help to walk you through that. But some of the key things you have to decide is: are you seeking a local partner? I mean, are you going to sell? Are you going to send one of your existing team members over to that market to sell? Are you going to hire somebody there to sell directly? Or are you going to go through a partner and sell indirectly via that partner, have somebody else sell on your behalf?
Channel, like
Yeah.
sales channel.
There's the sales channels.
One parameter.
Yeah, is one parameter, yeah. Yeah, sales parameters, you know, ability to raise funding, similarity of culture. I think there's I mean, one of the things that's a challenge for Russia, I was thinking, is presumably, I guess a lot will go to, like, Israel would be easier to get to. It's a small market, but there's a lot of ties between Israel and Russia, so that's helpful. Maybe Europe, which is at least geographically adjacent and nearby, or China, where there's huge growth opportunity and is adjacent to the other side of Russia. But a lot, I imagine, will want to go to the US, where there's already a robust ecosystem, but I think in which can work. But the time zone differences are a challenge. The cultural differences are not huge, but not insignificant. So I don't know. It will vary by company, and I think that's the job. That's the analysis, is to go through for your own company and determine how are you going to compare. You know, what are your chances? Where are you best off? But the trick is to be thoughtful about it. You have to think it through carefully. You can't just wing it. It's too expensive and challenging. All right, let me break there, you guys. I think we have a coffee break. I appreciate your guys' time. I had fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it.